Hi there, this is Talking in Technicolor. My name is Ryan.
My name is Theresa.
And we're here to bring you a new podcast about psychedelics, mycology, foraging, drug decriminalization, many topics. Our first order of business tonight is to talk to you guys a little bit about what Talking in Technicolor is. We kicked around a few names before we decided to do this thing, but Theresa came up with Talking in Technicolor, so I figured we'll have her talk to you about that.
Yeah, so my buddy came to give a presentation for the Psychedelic Club, and he did a presentation on the history of LSD. And there's this video of this woman, like, back in the 60s, she goes to a doctor and drinks, like, a glass of water filled with LSD. And she's having all these visions, like, in the doctor's office. And there's one point she was like, I wish I could talk in Technicolor. And, like, that stuck with me a lot. And, like, I was like, that's it. That's what we gotta name it. So, yeah. Talking in Technicolor.
Are you looking? Can you?
Yes, what should I see?
I wish I could talk in Technicolor, or let you see. Can you? Did you say you can see it?
No, I can't quite see it. Tell me about it.
I can't tell you about it. If you can't see it, then you'll just never know it. I feel sorry for you.
It sounded pretty cool to me. That's part of why we got this tapestry. Here's our backdrop. And it really looks like this woman is talking in Technicolor, which I think is super cool. But yeah, so I think kind of a good thing for us to start off with is what kind of topics within the stuff we discussed we might cover. You know, Theresa and I both have involvement in a few different organizations. We're with the Fort Collins Mycological Society, and Theresa is president of the CSU, or Colorado State University Psychedelic Club. So kind of our idea as we're going through this is we get a lot of guest speakers, and we think it would be a fun opportunity for everyone to maybe get them in front of a camera or in front of a microphone, as the case may be, and interview them about their topics. It could be anything from, say, psilocybin journeys or breathwork, ayahuasca. What kind of topics do you have coming up?
Anything mushroom related. Really, I want to use this podcast as like a way to like reach out to some really cool people in the community, the mushroom community, the psychedelic community, and just talk about, like, meet new people and talk about things that I'm really passionate about. So, like, I really want to talk about decriminalizing all drugs. I want to talk about Terence McKenna. It'd be cool to have Dennis McKenna on here. Just like, I just have so many things to say about Terence McKenna and just like psychedelics and like why they should be integrated in our society more, and like how people could be using them for PTSD and that kind of stuff. So really, I want this to be a way to like educate people and let people know like why we care about this kind of stuff. So
yeah, I think that's really well put. And you know, I got to say on this end, one thing that made me and Theresa hit it off is we're both Terence McKenna fans. He's sort of when I was getting started out in this, was sort of my patron saint of psychedelics. And still, in many ways, he is. He absolutely has his moments where he's full of hot air. But then again, who doesn't?
Yeah.
Right?
That's why we love him, though. So.
Yeah. And that voice.
Yeah, dude, that's like almost my favorite part of him.
Yeah.
The voice.
Absolutely.
It's great.
So yeah, I think one good opportunity, like Theresa was saying, is we do want to get people on. So if you're watching this and you are perhaps interested in coming in, you know, talking with us about it, whether your experience is very limited, say you're someone seeking to do psychedelics and you want to do a before and after interview, that's something we might cover here on the channel. Or if you're someone who actively does, say, psychedelic integration therapy with patients, or maybe you're a ketamine person, or you want to talk about your ayahuasca trip you did down in Peru last year. Any and all of that is on the table. really what we're trying to do is take a snapshot of where psychedelic culture is right now, and maybe shine a light on some interesting points of conversation, learn about how people use it in their daily practice, or hopefully not every day, but frequent practice, as the case may be, and kind of go from there. I thought it would be a good idea for us to talk about our individual experiences with psychedelics, so if Theresa, if you want to take it away first, and I can follow.
Sure. So, I mean, I was like the normal teenager who like tried it back in the day, but I feel like I really started to use it as a medicine. I started to use it to treat PTSD. I started microdosing, and really it was the only thing that helped me get through some of the hardest parts of my life. And it was just like, I don't know, there's something about it where it just like allows you to see a different point of view. Like sometimes when you have PTSD, you can only see this like narrow view of the world. Like you're forgetting about all the beautiful trees and the beautiful like your friends and family, and I feel like it just like lets you step outside yourself and see things from a new perspective. Made me realize that I can change the things. I don't have to accept the things that happen to me. I can change the world. I can be a part of just something bigger, and I don't have to be a victim anymore. So I feel like it was like one of the biggest things that changed my life and made me feel powerful. It made me want to start the psychedelic club, and made me want to change laws decriminalizing mushrooms. And honestly, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I just had, before I did psychedelics, I was just kind of so unambitious and like wasn't really going anywhere in life, and like, I don't know, I like to say like, sometimes I feel like I was such a peasant before I used psychedelics. Like, I was just a peasant, like, I didn't do anything, like, didn't have any goals or any ambitions, but there's something about when I'm on mushrooms, like, I get everything done on my to-do list. I want to, like, save the world. I don't know, it just, like, makes me feel big and powerful, and it makes me feel like I can do anything, and I don't know, it just makes you feel like you can do something bigger. So.
Sure. So what was your first psychedelic?
My first psychedelic was mushrooms, and that's like my main psychedelic.
Me too.
So yeah, mushrooms, and that's like why I went back to school for mushrooms too. So it's like, it's the reason I'm back at school, and but yeah, so mushrooms is the biggest one.
Do you feel comfortable sharing details of your first trip?
Oh, my first trip? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Man.
I think
Okay.
that'd be a great
I don't know
thing for
if
us
I've
to
told
talk
you this
about.
before.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so first trip, dude. So I was like 16 years old, little me in Baltimore City, and like I remember we ate them on like peanut butter sandwiches or something like that, and it was
Gross.
disgusting. Yeah, it was like these gross dry cracker things on a sandwich. Like, it was disgusting. But so that was like about an eighth though, which is like pretty big for me, especially because I'm like so tiny too. So I feel like so this was like in a really weird part of my life. So I was 16, and I had like social anxiety so bad at that point. Like, there was a couple years where I like couldn't talk to anyone. Like, I don't know, I was
Really?
like almost mute for a couple years. It was like
Wow.
weird. Like, I don't know, someone would talk to me, I would just be like, I don't know, it's just like I couldn't say anything. It was just
Wow.
like, I don't know.
I didn't realize it was that intense for you.
Yeah, it was like really bad. Like, I remember I would go home and like have to rub my cheeks because I didn't I didn't talk
Oh, wow.
all day long. It was just like the most lonely feeling
That was
ever.
when you were a teenager?
Yeah. So, but when I tried mushrooms, this was the first time I ever felt like a social butterfly. Like,
Nice.
I felt like I was finally able to like talk the way I wanted to and like bond with other people and like just like say whatever I wanted and laugh with other people. Like, I felt like it had been so long since I had been like comfortable to do that with other people. So I just remember like feeling like I was the life of the party. I was making jokes, I was cracking jokes, everyone was like laughing at me, and like
Nice.
it was just like, I was like, wow, this is what social people must feel like. This feels great. And it's just like the first time I just felt so connected to other people, and
That's great.
it was like the most beautiful thing. And like, that's why it's like, I look back at those times, like, I couldn't even talk to people back then, and now I'm like running a psychedelic club. I talk in front of people all the
Yeah.
time. Like, you can still kind of see, like, sometimes I'm, like, super nervous and, like, I forget to breathe and stuff, but it's hard to, like, yeah. It's, like, hard to almost imagine, like, I wasn't even able to talk to people
Oh, sure.
not too long ago, so.
That's awesome,
I feel
Theresa.
like mushrooms are, like, a big part of me being able to, like, speak and have that voice again, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have to say, like, I don't know if I've shared this with you ever either, but my experience growing up was pretty similar. I actually couldn't look people in the eyes without my eyes watering.
Really?
So I would, if I made eye contact, I would, like, start crying a little bit. Like, I was so socially anxious. Worked through a lot of that, but by the time I came around my first mushroom trip, obviously that betrays some underlying anxiety, and I was to the point where every 30 seconds to a minute I would think about death and dying, and I just had such terrible death anxiety that I was contemplating killing myself because, I just was incredibly obsessive in a very unhealthy way, to the point where I'd wake up with night terrors screaming about dying or what it's going to be like when my consciousness ends. And, it was also the same part of my life where I'll be honest, I'm an atheist, and I had realized I'm an atheist. And that was very scary for someone who grew up in a very traditional Christian household, to suddenly realize that for me there might not be something after death, and just coping with that. And so I'd heard about psilocybin mushrooms via a Paul Stamets interview on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Nice.
And I know approximately 70% of you are rolling your eyes right now, and that's okay, whether it be about Paul Stamets or Joe Rogan. But he mentioned that they use it for folks with cancer to deal with their death anxiety, and that it helps extinguish fear. And I realized this is exactly what I need. So over the course of a few months, because I don't really know any drug people, I was able to get a hold of some mushrooms eventually after asking, everyone's dog walker, do you have mushrooms? And I'm sure a great personal risk. But my first trip just showed me, without prattling on too much about it, just the whole creation and evolution of life on Earth from beginning to end, and then also lots of images about death and the gnashing of teeth, and a lot of, like, bloody demon teeth chewing on raw meat kind of imagery when I would close my eyes. And it just became so absurd that I had to laugh at it. And I realized that I'm kind of looking at that as I'm looking at this fear of death that I have. And it's sort of equally laughable to be so obsessed with your death that you can't live your life. And literally since that day, about 2-3 years ago, I have not had any death fear, except maybe periodically I ponder it and get a little worried, but certainly the obsessive, caught in a loop of thoughts has really been extinguished entirely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like it's almost like trying to prep us for death. Like it's trying to just, like, I don't know. That's probably why it's good for end of death.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff. Interesting.
Yeah, I have thought about that quite a bit, because I imagine, now this is just in my mind and what I think at this point, I imagine there's a portion of the death experience that's probably similar to being on a higher dose of psychedelics.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's connected. Sometimes I wonder if it's like we're almost going to the same world that we go to when we die or something.
Sure.
Or when we're dreaming or something like that.
Well, and I'm going to put on my anthropology hat here. A little background on me. My study at Colorado State University was primarily ethnography. So when I look at psychedelics, I really like to explore what they were used for traditionally. So a little background there. Theresa knows all of this already. But a lot of times, entheogenic plants and fungi, obviously, are used for things like soul retrieval, shadow work, going to some sort of spirit realm, especially in the Peruvian cosmology, things like ayahuasca and San Pedro. There's absolutely some journeying to the spirit world with it. Even things like salvia, the chewed salvia leaves, they believe they're going to the spirit world in their form of shamanism. But yeah, I think it's interesting that people all over the world have kind of come to this conclusion, and us as just Americans trying some mushrooms, we can kind of come to that conclusion too.
Yeah, it's interesting how it kind of connects all these different cultures together.
Absolutely.
It's like part of every culture.
Yeah. Well, I know our friend Terrence McKenna talks a lot about it to the Jungian collective unconscious. So my mother-in-law is a Jungian psychologist, and anytime I talk to her about my mushroom trips, she gets excited and she's like, "Wow, that's exactly what Carl Jung said about XYZ." And she's like, "Have you been reading Jung?" And I'm like, "No, I've just been taking mushrooms."
Same thing, I guess.
Been eating Jung.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So we've talked about our mushroom experiences. What else have you tried that you might want to talk about?
Ooh, we should talk about Amanita Muscaria.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh man. So I know that we've been wanting to do this for a
Yeah.
while, but it's like one of those psychedelics that's you don't almost want to try it all the time. It's just really intense, really just I thought, so when I did this, I thought it was going to be taking a low dose or a microdose, and I literally just broke off a tiny little piece of an Amanita Muscaria, which is the red and white mushrooms.
See this one
The famous,
right here?
Yeah. So I just took the tiniest little piece, put it in a big thing of tea, put some other mushrooms. I think I put chaga, sorry, or something like that. But so I just took a couple of sips of this tea, and I hadn't eaten anything that day too, so I think that was part of it. But it kicked in so fast. I literally just took a couple of sips of the tea, and I had to lay down because it was this is a psychedelic that's labeled a dissociative. I think that's what. So it's more kind of like a drunk feeling. It's the same receptors, the GABA receptors, the alcohol, different part of the receptor, but same kind of that woozy kind of weird feeling. But so that kind of started to kick in, and I lay down, and this is when I started to get panic attacks and just just thinking about it, I had to stop and breathe because it was just for some reason when I do psychedelics, I always think my throat is gonna close up or something.
Really?
I don't know what that is, but
I always get that when I smoke weed.
really?
I get a little nervous, feel like
Yeah.
my throat's tight.
There's something about that. I don't know, but I just I was oh my god, I can't breathe. I'm gonna
Sure.
I was just so I was all by myself using the Amanita Muscaria for the first time. I was just kind of scary. So I'm having this panic attack, and all of a sudden I feel there's this. I don't know how to explain it. It's so hard to talk about your trip
Sure.
sometimes, but this spirit lady, I couldn't see her face, the details of her face, but I could see her. She was super bright, and I could feel this pressure that would start in my head, and it would go down my body, and it would start back up, and
Oh, wow.
I felt like I was in a Xerox machine. Or
So
something.
you were feeling it in waves, kind of.
Yeah,
Huh?
it was a kind of a wave that would go through my body, and after that wave, I felt super calm. I've never felt more relaxed and just I don't know. I know some people use it for an antidepressant or or to relax or whatever in lower doses. So I could kind of see that from how I felt with that.
Really?
But, yeah.
With Amanita?
Yeah, really interesting. But so, and then there was one point where I astral projected. So I could I was in my bed. I could see myself over myself. I was like over myself and like watching myself in this place, but also I was like in a totally different place. I could feel myself in both of these places. Really strange feeling. But then I got like the classic like Alice in Wonderland. Like I was this huge person. Like I was as big as this room. Like that's what I felt like. And then I was like super tiny. And then I could like kind of go back and forth between these feelings and just like, I don't know, it was like super Alice in Wonderlandy. And then I had like the best sleep of my night. Like,
nice.
like yeah, it was
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah. So definitely something that like I'm scared to try again. So I definitely want to try it. Yeah, you know. We've like tried to set this up before, and I'm just like, I get scared every time.
I'll be honest, I do too, though.
Yeah, dude.
I'm
it's
like,
intense.
that's why every time I've been a little relieved. Like
Yeah,
the
like,
cancellation
good.
text from Theresa, I'm like, okay, I didn't think we were going to do this, but I think that's okay.
Yeah, dude. It's just one of those that's just really intense, so. But we gotta do it sometime.
Alright, well, it's on the record.
Yeah, it's on the record.
It's on the record.
But I kind of want to smoke it or something next time. Just like.
It's supposed to be mellow.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be more mellow to smoke it, so.
And, you know, we should say as we're talking about this stuff too that, I think both of us would, and I'll speak for myself, but say that we're not here to convince anybody to try any drugs, but
yeah, it's not for everyone.
And they certainly do all have their own inherent safety risks. Amanita Muscaria, of course, a lot of people contend that it's neurotoxic. It could have some damaging effects on your kidneys. But I know Theresa's found some varying research on that.
Yeah, I feel like, man, don't get me started on scientific research, because, like, it's a whole kind of mess, like, because all that research was done with mice, and they were injecting it, ibotenic acid, straight into the brain, so it's not the same as, like, eating the Amanita Muscaria, especially because you're decarbing a lot of that ibotenic acid into muscimol, so, yeah, just don't inject it straight into your brain, and you should be good, but
Should be alright.
also there's not enough research on all
Right.
these kind of things, so you really don't know what it could be a neurotoxin, like.
Yeah.
But there's also other research that shows it's good for your brain, so it's like, I don't know.
Well, in most older guidebooks, and I think a lot of current ones for mushrooms, if you're into foraging, you can find them, you know, most places, some form of Amanita Muscaria throughout the U.S. Here we have, I think, Amanita Muscaria Gesui, is that what it's called? That sort of a sunburst, yellow, and orange one. We also do get all the way down to the standard red ones. But, yeah, it's definitely not something you just want to go out and pick and eat. The guidebooks will say that it's toxic. I would put an asterisk next to that and say that when prepared properly and used in the proper dosage, it can be something that's relatively safe.
Yeah. And it was like one of the most spiritual things of my life. Like,
really?
I don't know, I feel like that spirit thing, like, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like it connected to me to like a spirit world or
Sure.
something, I don't know.
Well, you know, I can certainly say, having never done Amanita, I'm not 100% familiar with the way it makes you feel, but that does remind me, as long as we're sharing trip stories here, of a very important entheogen in my life. The first entheogen I ever actually really learned about in any depth is San Pedro cactus. I took a Peruvian anthropology class at CSU during my anthropology major, and we learned pretty quickly about the San Pedro cactus, and just in passing, the teacher happened to mention, oh, those are legal to grow in the United States. And I was like, how does she know that?
Yeah.
Why does she know that? But not saying, you know, that maybe she cultivates them, but I will say that semester every hippie in the class did some sort of report or paper on San Pedro or Chavin de Huantar, which is the site of an ancient San Pedro cult with some pretty cool petroglyphs. Speaking of which, CSU Psychedelic Club will be doing a presentation. I'll be doing one on San Pedro coming up.
I'm excited.
So we'll probably upload that here as well, or at least a link to it.
Yeah.
So keep a lookout for that. But yeah, so I learned about it in college, and I didn't think about it for a number of years until, actually no, that's not true. I feel like almost right away I ordered some San Pedro, but I didn't do it for a number of years.
Okay.
So I had some cuttings, and basically ended up just becoming ornamental plants, but eventually, under the right setting, I ended up taking that as my second entheogen. So I just kind of sat on that for years until I finally worked up the chutzpah to try it. And basically, the way I describe it is kind of a slow burn. It's like an all-day entheogenic lollipop, is what people say. You don't want to combine it. From personal experience, I feel like you don't want to combine it with anything else.
Oh yeah.
I made a foolish mistake at that one time and got a really, really high heart rate for a really long time. And it was up in the mountains, so good choices were not made that day. But I have had, my very first trip, I just felt like a child. It was kind of warm out, it's nighttime, and the trees were blowing, and everything was moving in kind of a tracer effect. I was sitting around a fire, which was impossible to light when you're giggling your ass off on mescaline, and the wind is blowing.
Oh shit.
But we eventually, with the help of someone else who was not impaired, started a fire, and they stayed and watched us too. Yeah, it was the first time in my adult life of being super depressed that I was able to feel like a kid again. And I remember lamenting to myself, oh, am I never going to feel that way again? Am I going to feel like this all the time from now on? And that's about where I was at like 27 or so. Just really lamenting the death of like being happy and young. And San Pedro, they say it opens your heart, and that couldn't be more true for me. But I've explored it a little deeper with some different variation of types of cacti, and the craziest time ever for me, I turned into, now there's a lot of animal transformation stuff with San Pedro when you have visions, especially snakes, jaguars, like jungle animals from Peru, and that could have just been planted there by me reading about it a bunch, or that could just be something inherent to San Pedro, I don't know. But I turned into a great boa constrictor climbing up the world tree, or the Axis Mundi, which is like this great big, South American jungle tree going into the sky. And as I start to get near the top of it, my soul gets ripped into a cave with an ancient demon, showing me cave paintings and telling me to draw my own. And he wanted me to paint a man without fear. And so I painted a man standing with a length of cactus in his hand, and then I turned into that painting. That turned into me, and then I was in my room again. So it wasn't like I was closing my eyes and seeing this. It was like I was there in the cave with the demon, painting, talking to him.
What if that's where all petroglyphs are from? Like, that's where they came from. Like,
People getting whipped into the past by San Pedro.
That'd be fucking awesome.
Well,
wow.
And I think it brings back to something I've been looking at a lot. As you know, and as some of you watching this might know, I have a psychedelic integration group that is resuming meeting at the CSU Psychedelic Club. And basically what we do is we sit around with small groups of like 5 and talk about our experiences. Because if you are uninitiated, if you've never done this kind of thing, stories like the ones me and Theresa just said might seem pretty out there. But one thing that I found as we're talking to these people is a lot of times they'll have archetypical religious fantasies or religious, hallucinations or whatever you want to call them, journeys. One gal in one of our groups was talking about seeing Grecian, like Greek frescoes, like pottery painting. I've certainly seen the Aboriginal stuff and cave paintings. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
I feel like the spirit lady on Amanita was like, well, I did get abducted by aliens on that really high dose. Like,
Okay, I think we're going to have to know about that right away.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The alien abduction story, huh? So, alright, this was a couple years ago, and this is probably the biggest dose of cubes I've ever done. But, so, once again, I started off just microdosing, and just, like, sometimes I, like, just like to start low, and then I'll just, like, end up munching and munching. Like, who knows how much I really ate. Like, I feel like maybe it was around, like, 5 grams or something like that, but...
Oh, so you had the full
I think
hero's
so.
journey.
I think so. That's what it felt like, at least. It was definitely more than, like, an eighth or something like that, but... Okay, so I'm just, like, sitting in my room, and I was actually contemplating death, and I was just, like, thinking about how I would, like, it wasn't that I didn't care if I died, I was just, like, I don't know, I was just very comfortable with that idea. So that was kind of how the trip started off, and then there was one point where I, like, had to lay down, because I was just, like, so overwhelmed, but, so, I could, like, feel and hear, like, it was almost like wind going past my ears, like, super fast. Like, I just felt like I was just, like, going super fast.
Really?
And all of a sudden, I could, like, it was like the astral projection thing again. It was like I could see myself over my body, and I was, like, watching myself being, like, there was some kind of surgery going on. There was me on this table, big lights on me, 2, like, beams or something. Like, I don't know if it was... They kind of looked alienish, they kind of looked people-ish, but, and they were doing something to my brain. They were doing some kind of brain surgery on me, and I was, like, watching them do it, and anytime they would, like, touch my brain, I would, like, feel it when I was sitting in my bed, too. So I could, like, watch it happening to my body in this other place, and then, like, I would feel it in my bed, and...
So you felt sensations of touch.
Yeah, it was, like, I don't know.
What did they feel like?
It was, like, it's, like, hard to explain, like, almost like a pulsating or, like, vibrating.
Like a buzzing, maybe?
Yeah, and there's sometimes, like, randomly, I'll, like, start to feel it in my brain.
Like still?
Yeah, still.
Wow.
And so that was happening. I was, like, watching myself and, like, feeling it in both places, and then that's all I remember, really. So, and
That's really interesting.
I've heard other stories about brain surgeries and psychedelics, too, so.
Well, there's a lot of, and I've heard people say this as well, certainly scanning of the body. Sometimes it'll be like little doctors, and they do often feel like a scrubbing or a buzzing feeling.
I wonder if, like, this is, like, a tool used by higher beings or something, and, like, when we use mushrooms, we can interact with them in this other world or something.
Yeah,
and, like, I don't know, man. I feel like, it's like Terence McKenna says, like, hallucinations are like a species of reality.
Sure.
So it's like a different kind of reality. It's like, this is reality, but that's just like a different type. I don't know.
Well, I think about that a lot as well. And I think one thing that comes across to me a lot during the psychedelic experience is the idea of the transfer of information. You know, and I hear a lot of people, especially in ayahuasca circles, say that they received a download.
Yeah.
And that's certainly been my experience with ayahuasca as well. But, yeah, I do often wonder, and this is something I've brought up a lot of times, is it possible that, you know, in an infinite universe, when you see something in the psychedelic experience, if the world is, or if the universe is infinitely large, is it possible then that whatever you're seeing, by necessity, must also exist somewhere in the universe, if we do truly live in an infinite universe and multiverse? So, when you think about it that way, it's totally possible, and, you know, to get kind of out there, before getting to that part of the podcast, I guess, when it becomes Coast to Coast AM. You know, I wonder, Terence McKenna also brought up the idea, and it really resonated with me, and a lot of people in UFO circles, not that I'm a total UFO guy, just a little bit, and not like our friend who has pictures of UFOs.
Oh, yeah? Wait, who?
Mike.
Oh,
Get you, Mike.
Oh, yeah, I'm
but,
showing you those,
right?
actually.
And they are they're convincing. If I can get a screenshot, I'll try to post it. But they, Terence McKenna said that it's possible that when you're taking mushrooms, you could be actually communicating with aliens somewhere in the multiverse, because it makes more sense to transport information over large distances than physical bodies and nuts and bolts and spaceships. So it makes sense that a sufficiently advanced race of beings would send information out into the universe, encoded perhaps in the DNA of mushrooms. So that was the big take. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but that was the big takeaway of my first mushroom trip.
Oh, really?
It showed me an asteroid landing on the planet and the full evolution of life, all the way through dinosaurs and humans, and it basically, the mushroom showed me that it was some sort of alien that came to Earth, and the way that life is distributed through the universe is with panspermia, or
Dude, I believe
DNA
that shit.
from
It just
asteroids.
makes so much sense. Yeah. Because that shit can travel through the universe. It doesn't get broken down or anything. It can last, like, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say for me too, like, I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I was told while I was in this state of mind. And it's one thing to hear it, but then to actually see it play out over the course of billions of years in sort of time lapse like I was shown. Incredibly detailed, by the way. It was super intense, but it feels like first-hand experience, and I think that's something that's a really interesting topic we could talk about, is this idea of, even if these things we're experiencing aren't true, because you experienced it happen, does it matter? What do you think about that?
Huh. Man, I feel like, I don't know, because everything is so different for different people. All realities are so different. It's like, there's other creatures that have different, like, senses than we do. They have this whole other reality, kind of. So, who's to say what reality is in the first place?
Yeah.
First, we gotta figure out what reality is. And
Right.
then we can see, like, if these other things are reality, I guess.
For sure.
I don't know. We could
Yeah.
go down that rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like, lobsters can see an X-ray, apparently.
Yeah,
they say.
there's, like, all that kind of stuff. Like,
And deer's infrared.
yeah.
So.
And who knows all these other things that could exist? We don't even know. We don't have access to them or something.
Yeah, and you know, remote sensing, we're already at a point where one of my college professors at CSU, Dr. Chris Fisher, along with obviously a whole team of people, but they are the ones who discovered that hidden giant complex, the lost city in the jungle.
What?
So apparently the Amazon basin, where the rainforest is being destroyed now, back then a lot of it was cleared, and they had large cities there. They had this way of making a biocharcoal that could be utilized to enrich the poor jungle soils, and basically this whole city, the jungle, the rainforest, has regrown when they collapsed when the Spanish came and brought diseases. But getting around to the point of the segue, the way they discovered it was using LiDAR, which is direct, I don't know what frequency of light, but it is a laser of some type that penetrates the forest canopy to just map the contours of the ground. And if you know anything about GIS or mapping, what's really neat is you can take this image and look at it from above, and if I were looking at a map, because I did some GIS stuff in college, I could show you, here's a city, because humans are the only thing that create straight lines in nature. So they're seeing a bunch of square, rectangular furrows in the jungle floor, and they found one of the oldest and largest complexes of human life in the rainforest currently, from the time when previously a lot of it was cleared, which is cleared and managed, which is really interesting. But without a sense that we can see with our eyes, this remote sensing equipment has been able to reveal new truths. So I think it's possible that by altering our consciousness in certain ways, at least about ourselves and our own experiences, we can uncover some new truths, maybe about the way we think as well, you know?
Yeah, because that was a tool that was used to see something else that we couldn't see. And
Right.
What if psychedelics are just another tool that we can use? Like, the
Right.
microscope, like, dude, there are millions and billions of little organisms, like, on you, in you, like, microbes, like, helping us eat food, and
Right.
these are invisible creatures that are just, like, helping us digest things,
Surely.
helping us, like, fight off other bacteria and stuff, like,
Right.
this is this whole world that's right in front of us, and if we didn't have this one tool, we wouldn't even know that they would exist.
Right.
So what if there's other tools that we just don't have access to yet?
Well, I think that's a really good point, and I do think that this is a good way to exercise some of your cognitive toolbox.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously, one thing that comes to mind for me, as a result, at least my personal experience with psychedelics, and of course everyone's is different, as you were saying, but, you know, you talk about, you know, cells in your body, you know, there's more foreign cells in your body, so more microbes living in you than you have your own cells.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Weird.
they outnumber you something like 2 to 1 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
But even on a larger scale, like when I get into a deeper mushroom experience, typically I'm left with the feeling that just as your body is made up of many different beings, you also, your individuality is part of an even greater being. You could consider that the ecosystem or just the planet, that you get this feeling that the earth is one great being, and then further, I also feel the sense that I'm not truly separate from the universe, that there's being that's a reality dissolving substance, or a boundary dissolving substance rather, as Terence McKenna always used to say. For me, it really does show me that I am you, you are me, the tree is me, that I'm part of the sky. You know, it might sound pretty woo-woo, but that's just the sense I'm typically left with when I go into that journey.
Yeah. It's like, I wonder if each cell in our body thinks it's like one separate thing. Like, what if we're
Right.
connected to this bigger thing that we just don't realize it or something?
Yeah, there's a liver cell somewhere in you
Yeah.
complaining about the cost of bread.
yeah, dude. Yeah, I don't know.
Trying to vote whether a white blood cell or a red blood cell is going to be in charge of the stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing we get into too. Like, we all have these individual dramas playing out in our own minds that as the day goes by, you know, this idea that as we're going through life, we're internally watching a movie of our life and analyzing it, like rewinding it, going back over it.
Well, that's kind of trippy to think about it.
Right? And you're almost writing your future movie, like you get up in the morning, you think, what am I going to do? And you see yourself throughout the day, and then you go through that, and your mind has a simulation of what that's going to be like, you know. But we don't even think about the fact that we think that way, at least those of us who do. I mean, everyone thinks differently, but, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. It's like almost you hallucinate it before it happens. Like you gotta see it in your head.
Well, and I think our entire cognitive experience is bounded by and shaped by chemical reactions in your brain. So Dennis McKenna says a lot that your waking existence is, in a sense, a hallucination.
Yeah, dude, that's really trippy to think about. I saw this one meme, and it was like, what if oxygen is just another psychedelic drug, and like once you start huffing it, stop puffing it, that's when you die, or something like that. Like,
oh my goodness.
just like breathing this oxygen is like, this is the psychedelic itself, or something.
Well, and it's something to be considered. You know, what seems like normal to us, we could look at the world around us, and I'd imagine other types of life would see everything completely differently.
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea what this room looks like through the eyes of a fly.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. It's probably some like psychedelic trippy thing, and it's kind of funny to think about like oxygen as a psychedelic, especially when you think about like breathwork and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
'Cause that's like changing your. I've hallucinated almost from just breathing oxygen in a different way. So I don't know, man. It's kind of interesting.
I will tell you, in terms of breathwork, 2 things. I will say, last year, when I got really into meditation during psychedelics as well, and after an ayahuasca trip I did get to the point for a short while where I could actually start tripping from meditating.
Whoa.
And I would come out of it too and think I would just snap right back to normal. But I remained like I was on a mushroom trip for a good hour,
Whoa.
completely sober.
Wow.
It's also when I decided it was time to lay off a little
Take a
bit.
little break.
Take a little
Yeah,
break.
yeah.
My cheese was slipping off my cracker.
Yeah, you gotta put that cheese back on cracker.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a really important thing to talk about too,
Yeah.
is moderation.
Mhm.
I want to say
But moderation in your moderation too. So
Yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta get weird, man.
everything
You know,
in
like-
moderation, including moderation.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. But
But yeah, you can't just do it all the time, kind of thing. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was doing that for a while too, and I did feel like I was almost tripping a little bit when I was sober too.
yeah, you
so.
got a little HPPD.
I think so. Yeah.
Hyper persistent psychedelic disorder?
Is that it?
I don't know if
I
that's
have
what.
no idea, honestly.
I don't know. But yeah, after I did San Pedro the time where I like became a boa constrictor and such, I did, because I'd done mushrooms shortly before that and shortly after that, because I was just trying to explore and heal myself throughout that year, and maybe flew a little too close to the sun. I was taking my dog for a walk, and at the end of the street, a vortex opened up. So, yeah, just for a moment, like a Rick and Morty wormhole, and I kind of blinked twice, and then it went away.
Whoa,
So.
dude. What? That was
Yeah.
when you were sober?
That was when I was sober. And that was just from, my light turned itself off
I
there.
was wondering what.
But yeah, that would start happening when I'd smoke a little cannabis. So, not completely sober, but certainly
Yeah.
just like,
That's
what?
my baseline sober.
Right.
Just cannabis.
I read an article this week where they're starting to call that California sober.
I saw that, yeah.
I'm like,
like
California sober.
Yeah, dude, I like
So
that.
when you're like, were you sober? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I was just a little high.
Yeah. That's exactly
So
what it
no.
is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So no, not a little sober. But yeah, so I just think, I forget who said this, but they say once you've gotten the message, hang up the phone.
But sometimes the phone rings again with a different message.
The phone can definitely ring again.
Yeah.
And I had about 6 months recently where I decided to hang it up, and finally recently did partake again. And you know, it's kind of a hard winter or hard fall because my dog had died right at that time. And I was feeling really down in the dumps, and so I took just a moment to center myself without any psychedelics, to lean in hard to things like you know, therapy and meditation, walking, reading, doing, and just getting back to the things that I love again. And then I got to a place where I felt like I could do a little bit of mushrooms, and I had probably perhaps the second best trip of my life. Not better than the first one ever, but really impactful, and have just been so much more productive and well managed emotionally since then. And but I think, you know, it wouldn't have happened that way if I didn't take that time off.
Yeah, you gotta take a break every now and then.
Yeah, my trips were starting to get really dark and negative and scary.
Yeah.
Lots of clowns and jesters bugging me.
That seems to be like a common thing. I wonder what.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who see jokers or jesters.
Huh.
There's a lot of, when I was on my ayahuasca trip, there was a Native American gentleman with us, who's a member of, I forget the tribe, but down there in Albuquerque. And his trip, a lot of it was just Donald Trump winking at him.
What?
Like pointing at him and winking. And like, so he described that as being sort of his jester, was like Donald Trump.
Whoa. Sometimes I wonder, like, there's gotta be some kind of, like, reason that we're all seeing that. It's like, I don't know, if, I kind of wonder, like, what if it's, like, a message, like, saying that this is, like, not as serious, like, we're taking life too seriously or something like that. I don't know.
Well, I think sometimes that's where the dark stuff comes from. Because certainly when I'm shown my greatest fears, it sort of trivializes them a lot of the time. What about, so when you're in that sort of state, you see something crazy, are you always like, whoa, that's out there, or are you like, oh, I accept this is totally normal, and then, like, which camp do you fall into?
I don't know. I feel like it's more of a, it wasn't like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Somewhere in the middle, I guess.
Yeah.
But definitely like, I don't know, because I kind of think it's part of reality too, so it's not like super.
It just seems
crazy.
normal almost sometimes,
almost,
right?
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, like I'll see,
Oh yeah, I just got abducted by aliens. You know,
right.
Just another Tuesday, dude.
Right. Or I've seen like a floating pyramid in space that's also a planet, but also a machine. And I'm like, I'm always trying to take mental notes, try to remember stuff for afterwards.
I like to analyze, like, why would I do
Yeah.
this? And like, because did I tell you about the Lindsay Lohan blanket story?
Oh gosh, that sounds vaguely familiar. I know
It's
your
like-
friend turned into a monster that time or something, right?
Yeah, my ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, let's
Oh my god, should we
let's
go
hear
into
it.
that?
Yes,
Okay.
let's.
Alright, my Lindsay Lohan story. Alright. So this was back in Baltimore. I think I was older at this point. I think I was around like 20. But this was maybe the third time or something I did mushrooms. My sister came to visit. She had been living in Colorado for a while, and she brought a bunch of mushroom like brownies or something like that. So I woke up in the morning, and for some reason I thought it would be okay just to like start chowing down on them.
Oh,
like, I hadn't eaten anything that day.
First
yet.
thing in the morning.
I don't know what the heck I was thinking, and I was just a goober. But so I'm just eating these brownies, and this was back in Baltimore, and I was just in this really toxic relationship. I've been with him for like for 6 years or something. Like that was like my high school boyfriend and stuff. And this was at a point where like heroin was just like everywhere, dude.
Oh wow.
Almost every single person I knew was on heroin, and it was just like a shit show everywhere. I just remember like begging people not to do heroin, like almost
Really?
every day. It was like a
Did you have a lot of
full-time
friends
job.
who would?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, my boyfriend like just begging him not to do it all the time. So it was a shit show, and so I'm on these mushrooms, and I'm looking at my boyfriend, and his face just like morphs into this like devil-looking thing, and he's just like, his face is like almost unattached from his head, and he's just like kind of coming at me. I'm like, oh my god, I got the fuck out of here. So I like go down in the basement, away from everyone else, and I just remember like, do you know that feeling like when you're super nervous and it's almost like a painful feeling like in your skin, sort of? I felt that like all over my body, like I just felt like almost like a embarrassed feeling or nervous feeling, just like super extreme. And then I remember seeing Lindsay Lohan's face like in this like blanket, and she was like coming at me, dude, and I was just like in the corner like like freaking out, like why the fuck am I seeing Lindsay Lohan? Yeah, so I've like, at first I thought that was like just some weird thing. Oh yeah, just some weird hallucination. I saw Lindsay Lohan in a blanket, weird. But when I started to really think about it, like this was a time in my life where I was just, so like I said, like I was scared to talk to people, and like I had really bad social anxiety, and I just like didn't really have any friends or anything, and so I would like watch like shitty celebrity gossip news. And,
Really?
Like, Lindsay Lohan.
Oh,
This was like when Lindsay Lohan was like in TMZ and like all that stuff like all the time.
So is that like 2012? Is that what we're
Stuff
talking
that-
about?
Yeah, something like that. She was just like everywhere. So
Wow.
when I really started to think about that, I was like, Lindsay Lohan's face in a blanket. Like, why would I see that? And I started to think about it, and it's like, what if the vision or whatever was trying to tell me that I'm using this as a, like, almost a security blanket. Like, I felt like I was using celebrity gossip as, like, a way to not socialize with other people. Like, it was my way of socializing without really talking to people. Because I feel like that's why people go to celebrity gossip. Like, they don't have real friendships, so they, like, see these other people's lives or something like that. And I felt like that's what I was doing. Like, I was replacing real friendships with Lindsay Lohan, and that's why I saw her face in this blanket coming after me. And after that trip, that was when I decided to move to Colorado. Like, that was like, that changed everything, dude, because that, like, got out of that toxic relationship. When I saw him as a monster, that kind of, like, really motivated that, too. So I stopped watching TMZ and, like, all that celebrity gossip after that, and, like, I don't know, I feel like ever since then, my life just, like, got so much better. So
Really?
I feel like some of those hallucinations might just seem silly and stupid at first, but when you, like, really start to think about them, like, why did you see these things?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
you can get a lot of information out about that. And that's why I like your integration classes or things, and you can just, like, talk about that more and just, like, kind of analyze what you're seeing.
Surely.
Because I feel like it's not just some silly thing sometimes. It can be a message.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, the benefit's kind of twofold. One, I think just, you know, when we talk about integration, what that means for people who haven't heard that before. Pardon me. What that means for people who haven't heard it before is, first of all, reintegrating yourself back into your body. So, you know, when you leave your body during a trip, or things feel strange, you know, part of integration implies just coming back to normal, being present, being mindful. But the other part is taking your experience and integrating that into your life. So, figuring out to you, what does that mean? How can it be useful to me? So just being able to talk to other people who have experienced similar things, and you know they're not going to look at you like you're crazy. You know, you might not always be able to say, be sitting around at family dinner with your father-in-law and talk about this time you did mushrooms.
I mean, you could, but...
my in-laws are actually fairly open to a degree.
Yeah.
I try not to go on too much about it. But, yeah, you know, so some of it just sounds so outlandish, you know, you might feel crazy talking to someone who hasn't been there. And
yeah, it's nice to be in that circle around other people with similar experiences.
yeah.
Talk about it in a safe place.
So, for you, I mean, obviously we've talked about integration and integration group, rather, just being able to talk. But, you know, there's other contemplative practices that people do. Meditation, walking. I'm a big fan of walking meditation. Maybe drawing or going to floats, or yoga. Or it could be something as simple as cross-stitching or knitting might be your meditative practice. But for you, what is yours? What do you, besides obviously just psychedelics and talking about psychedelics?
Yeah. Well, I feel like having the psychedelic club is almost my, like, integration thing. Like, I don't know, I feel like that's almost like therapy to me.
Interesting.
Like, after each event, it's like almost a psychedelic experience itself. Like, I just feel like, I don't know, it's like a therapy, and like you're just like smiling and like just laughing with people, and I don't know. So that's like a big part of me, like integrating things back into my life and having this group where I can talk about it and bringing people together. Like, I love that.
And we all, you know, can tell weird jokes that only this group of people would understand.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
You know, I always get a kick out of doing a Terrence McKenna impression with people who know what he sounds like. I'm not going to do it right now.
We should do one podcast where you just talk like that the
whole time.
Yeah.
Always just...
just sipping water.
Yeah,
dude. That was great.
I do get it, because I'm sipping water this whole time. If anyone wants to do a counter, you can count how many times I've sipped water. But yeah, no, Mike, a gentleman who comes there, the one with the compelling UFO pictures, he says that it feels like church, like leaving church.
It is. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I have to say, a big trouble with me growing, as I've been struggling with, you know, for many years I was spiritual or agnostic or Christian light. I kind of went to church, kind of didn't. You know, about 25, 26, I was able to sort of come out to myself and everyone else that I'm atheist. And the biggest loss in that turn of events is the feeling of community that I would get from being in church.
I think that's why people are drawn to religion, really.
Yeah.
You like, just have this whole set of friends when you have this thing in common.
Yeah. And, like, we don't have I mean, obviously, as a man, I can join a Wolf's Lodge, or I can't join the Grand Masons because I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
But you know, you could join the Moose Club or the Elks.
Oh, yeah.
But by and large, people in our generation don't do that, so that's kind of gone too. You don't get outside and talk to your neighbors. There's not neighborhood barbecues typically. You know, I'm friendly with both my neighbors. They're nice, but that's as far as it goes. You know.
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes we barbecue, but it's not the whole community getting together, you know. And so for me, it is the exact same feeling I would have going to church when I was a kid. When I leave, I almost feel like we need store-brand cookies and powdered lemonade.
Oh my god,
Like,
yeah.
That's
Make
what we
it
had at my
official.
church.
Yeah, dude, we do need snacks, I think. Yeah.
Maybe I'll bring some powdered lemonade
Yeah, I
sometime.
totally should.
But then people will think it's more than lemonade.
Oh
or,
yeah, they'll be like questioning what's in this drink.
Or maybe
Like,
someone will turn it into more than lemonade, which would be
yeah,
a problem.
Yeah, it could get weird, I guess.
Maybe we should bring our own beverages.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I definitely feel like it's a churchy kind of feel though. Like just that community and like having cool people to talk about things with. Like, yeah, that's important. People need that.
Yeah, and I think it's been really interesting this semester. We're getting more people from the community.
Yeah.
I'm one of the first time it was mostly students,
Oh yeah.
and then like me and Mike were just like the two old guys. And you know, it's funny to be surrounded by kind of feels like kids.
Dude, yeah, it's funny to be an adult student.
Yeah, but
Feeling that all the time.
it's really neat getting people from the community this
Yeah.
time,
All
because
kinds
we're
of people.
all kinds. There's like hardcore Christian libertarians and
We had like religious people, like you'd be surprised like how many Christians like will listen
Yeah.
to you about psychedelics. It's interesting.
and a lot of them, it brings them closer to their God,
Yeah.
which I find interesting.
Yeah.
And I feel like for a lot of people, when you have that kind of experience, you make of it, you use your tools and your kit to understand it. So for one person, it might be God. For me, it's always the universe or my
Yeah.
ancestors or something
Totally.
like that. More, you know, more of like the perennial tradition, like this underlying essence of all faiths tied together is what my
Nice.
experiences tend to be.
Yeah.
Very like universal Unitarian.
Nice, dude.
But yeah, and there's even like the hippie type libertarians as well. Very like socialist, flower child,
Oh yeah.
like people from the whole spectrum.
Yeah,
And
great.
it's neat to see that we can find people that are both so similar and so different than us, just in this
Yeah.
tiny community.
I love it. Yeah, we
Yeah.
got a good amount of diversity. And I like that there's like a lot more women that I thought too.
Oh, yeah,
It's almost
ton
like
of women.
even too. So that's really cool. to
I
see.
almost feel like there might be more women
It
this
almost
time.
seems like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if
It's
that's
interesting.
because I'm the president and they feel more comfortable or something.
It's
or,
a good thing either way.
But I feel like I have just noticed more women in the psychedelic community
Yeah.
too. So.
Well, there are the psychedelic bros out there, like the
Oh,
super
yeah.
toxic vape guys. No offense, people vaping. Or my Bernie bros out there.
Yeah.
That's a new word I learned today.
Bernie bros?
Bernie bro.
I
I'd
like
never
it.
heard that.
I like it. That's awesome.
We make fun of everybody equally here.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, dude. Just all kinds of people around.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good time to talk about. We have a couple circles coming up, so on the psychedelic inaugural hike, me and Theresa were workshopping ideas, and it's funny because it was very icy that day, so we tripped all over the place.
He's got dad jokes all day long. I literally tripped. I busted my ass several times.
Yes, that is the form of tripping I engaged in that day as well, just falling over like 5 times. I think that would make a great t-shirt still.
Yeah.
Something about tripping on the inaugural
Yeah.
Psychedelic Club ice hike.
I like it. Nice hike.
Ice hike, yeah. But I was talking about at some point I want to write an article or do maybe a podcast talk or something about psychedelic fatherhood, because I feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
as a father of 2 young boys, it's really helped me engage with them and heal some long-standing intergenerational trauma.
Mhm.
My family, my great-grandfather walked out on my great-grandmother, so my grandfather didn't have a dad, so he was a really weird dad to his son, who was my father and was in turn a super shitty father to me.
Huh.
And psychedelics, I feel like there's something that have healed that part of me, helped me receive that love, fatherly love from myself, and also got me closer to my gender, my maleness, like exploring that and understanding it, and where I fall on that spectrum. And in turn, I feel like it's made me a better father and a better husband to my wife Sarah, and you know, just overall more engaged with my community. And so, you know, I discussed this one time at a entheogenic gourd circle that Art Goodtimes led.
He's so cool.
Yeah, I was up at the
I
Telluride
love him.
Mushroom Festival.
Yeah.
But there was a gal there, we were talking about mushrooms, and I gave that whole spiel about how it's helped me be a better father, better husband, better man. And she turns to me straight up, there's a group of about 50 people in a sharing circle, and she goes, "That's not true. Mushrooms have feminine energy."
What?
And just shut me
That's a
down.
weird thing to say.
Yeah, and it was, I
That's-
saw,
Ugh,
she
I
was a
hate
San
that.
Francisco, like, really into herself kind of gal. And so that really kind of hurt my feelings, but it also made me think, you know, a lot of times men are so scared of sharing their feelings, and I kind of thought it would be a nice thing, as after Theresa brought it up, she was looking at having a women's circle, so we're going to have a men's discussion circle. Hopefully we can talk about some things like fatherhood and engaging in the masculine side of the psychedelic experience and what that means to people. Because, you know, I feel like sometimes inherently when you're talking about masculinity or femininity, this sort of underlying battle of the sexes comes out.
Yeah.
And I
It's like
think
a rivalry or something.
like, yeah, some sort of rivalry, or like, well, I only see psychedelic goddesses, or,
Yeah.
well, I experienced a psychedelic god, he looked like Poseidon, you know, and then people get started debating, and so I think that was kind of our idea, was to set up a safe space for each group to talk about and come together. And
Yeah.
what are your kind of plans for women's group? Like, what do you hope to talk about?
So I want to talk about how psychedelics can like help women with their like certain types of PTSD, like from sexual abuse, or just kind of like, I feel like there's something in our society which kind of like makes women like, I don't know how to say this, like slavey. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like we just like have this mindset that we are supposed to be quiet and like
Servile.
that kind of thing. And I feel like psychedelics kind of helped me like have a bigger voice and like have more of a balance with my feminine and masculine energy.
Sure.
I've always been like super tomboy, so I've never really been super feminine. So it's like, I feel like it's helped me connect with that part of me, but also with my masculine side, and like just having that balance, I guess, is the
Sure.
biggest thing for me. But I think it would be cool if we did the women's group and the men's group, and then we would like come together and like talk about like
Takeaways.
like takeaways and like how we can like balance those energies and like work
Sure.
together and that kind of thing. So I think that would be fun. But it would, I really like the idea, just like, because I really want more like psychedelic female friends too. So I feel like these
That would be
people
really
like,
good for you then.
yeah, I feel like it would just be able to way to connect with psychedelic ladies and just like talk about some things that are specific to us. So.
And personally, I'd love to find, so not to make this too much of a personals ad, but I would love to find some psychedelic father friends, like
Yeah.
some fellow psychedelic dads. We had one in the club last year, James, he just moved to Florida, and we used to take our kids foraging together, and, you know, I think, especially in terms of parenting, too, it'd be really interesting to hear from some parents about how it's affected their relationships with their children. Because I'm sure a lot of people may be listening or hearing this, or just have had that conversation of, you know, should someone who does drugs be a parent or have kids, and is it a safe environment? If you're someone who occasionally takes the mushrooms when the kids aren't around, you know.
Yeah.
You know, because I've heard a lot of discussion about that online, but it'd be interesting to open it up to that.
Yeah.
I would hope we get some more older folks in the group as well.
We almost should do just like another event where we talk about like psychedelic parenthood and like bring some
That'd be
parents in
interesting.
and like do it on like a Father's Day or something like that.
That would be really
kinda
fun.
Cool. Like bring your parents to the psychedelic club day.
Bring your dad.
Yeah, bring your dad. Like.
Hopefully you guys have hashed your shit out.
Yeah, right.
It's just often the type of people drawn to this sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I use mushrooms with my mom. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's just like
What was that like?
a feeling. We didn't take like a big dose or anything. It's more like micro, kind of low dose, but just like having that energy with her and like having her support me because she's been like so supportive of all of my psychedelic stuff. So
That's so nice.
it's nice to have that support. And it's funny though, like she sent me to like rehab for cannabis when I was like 15 or something, and now she like smokes more weed than I do.
That's
like,
funny.
Does mushrooms with me, so it's kind of funny to see how that changed.
Sure. Yeah, and my mother's been super supportive as well.
Sweet.
I couldn't see her wanting to do mushrooms with me.
Oh yeah.
I would consider it.
Yeah. You should bring her to the psychedelic club though, man. Come on.
Gonna bring your mom. I invited her to
Yeah.
an event, and she just didn't even reply.
She's like, oh no.
But on the other hand, she is always getting me a new mushroom shirt or a new mushroom jacket or a mushroom statue or so. And she's seen, you know, when I got my medical marijuana card when I was like 18, she was very supportive of that. My older brother, it's interesting. You talk about the servile traditional role of women. He is very much like a Baptist minister type. Wants to be the eldest male of the house and this and that, but yeah, he tried to get me to go to rehab for cannabis.
Oh yeah.
So rather than even be part of that conversation, I just moved out.
Yeah, dude, I would too.
And then eventually my mom like ended up helping me fill out the paperwork, and we like had a real heart to heart, and I was like, have you noticed that for the past year I've been a lot calmer, I've been less angry, I'm doing good in school again. So I was so anxious before cannabis that I couldn't even focus in class. I was getting C's my first semester in college. Second semester I'd started smoking marijuana, and my grades were up to A's. So.
Dude, I think there's something to that with cannabis and psychedelics. Like, I'll microdose and study, and I feel like it just allows you to see something in a different view, and makes it more fun. I think that's part of it. It's like makes it more entertaining.
Oh yeah, and my best papers in college were written while stoned and listening to David Bowie on my headphones.
Nice. Yes. Yeah, there's something to that. Like, I was talking to someone about this in the psychedelic club. Like, they were talking about how they use it to study physics class and that kind of stuff. It's like, I don't know, just like, because you'll be reading it, and then you'll like, what did I just read? And then you'll try some psychedelics and read it again. Like, I don't know, it just brings it to life more.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then we have all these like scientific discoveries that were made while on psychedelics. So
like the structure of DNA.
yeah, dude,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It's like there's something to that can help you just see things from a new view. Because I feel like so many scientists are like closed-minded and just like they have their idea of what the world is and they can't open up to anything else. And I feel like psychedelics just allow you like you don't know shit and like just kind of shows you like opens you up to new possibilities. I think.
And I think that's where we get a lot of the problems we have in our society right now. There's an ancient, long tradition of prohibition of visionary plants. You know, Christianity. You know, that's why in Europe the people who handled visionary plants, these women, usually were considered witches and burned at the stake, just because they know what you know, mugwort or mandrake does. You know, and we should do some mandrake. I'm just kidding. No, we should not do some mandrake.
Is that like intense or what? I don't know anything about mandrake.
You could die.
Oh
yeah,
shit.
You could,
Okay.
it's like
I don't know if I'm ready
a
for
legit witch's brew ingredient, but
Huh.
it's also like a dissociative, like datura kind of. But yeah, so they were subjugated, both along the lines of being women and being involved in a traditional indigenous culture.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two groups that tend to suffer a lot.
Yeah.
And, combined with that, in the move away from more of that traditional Christianity, people have become more scientific as well, I feel like. And that really encourages this idea of the Cartesian divide, where your mind is separate from your body, and you see things in black and white, you see things in just juxtapositions and separation. And whereas psychedelics, I feel like, encourage that oneness.
Yeah.
So we have like a few hundred years of cultural baggage to contend with before you can even start to shake down to that level, I feel like.
Yeah,
And I feel like that very first trip for a lot of people, sounds like you for sure, blows all of that out of the water
yeah.
pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does.
For sure. Well, let me see where we are time-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like we're sitting at about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take. It'll probably be shorter than that when we post this, because there was some goofiness in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
My dog came in
Yeah.
and just needed to be pet by Theresa, so
Yeah.
she's in her cage now. But I think we did a pretty job covering what we want to talk about today. Is there anything else that you feel like you'd want to add that we can get to?
I mean, I got a lot of things to say about Terrence McKenna, but we'll have lots of time, so we'll have lots of podcasts.
I feel like when we don't get a guest sometime, we should absolutely just devote a full episode to Terrence appreciation.
We have to, yeah. I'm down with that.
And maybe some razzing on him too, because
Yeah.
there are
we'll
lots
razz
of
on
great
a
Terrence
little bit,
McKenna memes we could talk about.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, on that note then, I want to thank anyone who stuck with us for this long, for giving this a shot, for either watching or listening. If you're interested, if you're local to Fort Collins, Colorado area, and you want to appear on the podcast, have something interesting to talk about, you can contact us through either our YouTube channel or on Facebook. I'm sure we will start a Talking Technicolor page soon. So let us know, and if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below, and smash that bell. Right.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. That was great. That was fun.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Theresa.
Yeah.